When I called my daughter Keisha to ask about her wedding plans, she looked me right in the eye through the video call and said with a cold smile, "Oh, Mom, we already got married last weekend. We only invited important people." The words hit me like a truck. Important people. I stared at my daughter's face on my phone screen. The same face I had kissed goodnight for 18 years. The same face I had worried over when she was sick. The same face that used to light up when she saw me. Now that face was telling me I wasn't important. "What do you mean you got married?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Keisha's smile got bigger, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that cuts like a knife. Chuck and I had a beautiful ceremony at the country club. His parents were there. His brothers and sisters. Our close friends. Everyone who matters. Everyone who matters. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Keisha, I'm your mother." "I know that, Mom. But you know how you get. Always asking questions. Always worrying." Chuck thought it would be better if we kept it simple. Chuck thought. Everything was about what Chuck thought now. "When did you decide this?" I asked. "We've been planning it for months." Chuck wanted a small, elegant wedding. No drama. No stress. No drama. Like having your own mother at your wedding would be drama. I looked at my daughter through the phone screen. She was wearing a white sweater I had never seen before. Probably something Chuck bought her. Her hair was different too, shorter, more styled. She looked like a stranger. "Keisha, I raised you by myself for 25 years. I worked 3 jobs to put you through college. I was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every important day of your life. And you didn't think I was important enough to be at your wedding." Her smile finally disappeared. "Mom, don't make this about you. This is about me and Chuck starting our new life together." "Our new life," I repeated. "What about your old life? What about your family?" "You are my family, Mom. But Chuck is my husband now. He comes first. Chuck comes first." The words echoed in my head like a bell ringing. "Where is Chuck now?" I asked. "He's at work. He has an important meeting today." Of course he did. Chuck always had something more important to do than talk to me. "Can I see some pictures from the wedding?" I asked, even though it hurt to ask. Keisha's face got uncomfortable. Maybe later, Mom. Chuck doesn't really like me sharing our private moments with other people." Other people. That's what I was now. Other people. "I have to go, Mom. Chuck is calling me for lunch." "Keisha, wait." But she was already hanging up. I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. The screen went black, showing my own reflection. I looked old. I looked tired. I looked like a woman whose daughter had just erased her from the most important day of her life. Important people. I thought about all the times I had been important to Keisha. When she had nightmares as a little girl and crawled into my bed. When she got her first period and was scared and embarrassed. When she didn't get into her first choice college and cried for hours in my arms. I had been important then. But not anymore. Now Chuck was important. Chuck's family was important. Chuck's friends were important. But the woman who gave birth to her, raised her, loved her more than life itself? Not important. I put my phone down on the kitchen table and stared out the window. It was a beautiful October day. The kind of day that would have been perfect for a wedding. My daughter's wedding. The wedding I wasn't invited to. I couldn't stop thinking about Chuck after that phone call. I remembered the first time Keisha brought him home. It was about 2 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon. I was making pot roast, Keisha's favorite meal, when she walked through my front door with this tall, handsome man in an expensive suit. "Mom, I want you to meet Chuck," she said, practically glowing with happiness. Chuck walked over to me with a big smile and perfect white teeth. "Mrs. Johnson, what a pleasure. Keisha talks about you constantly." He shook my hand with both of his hands, like politicians do on TV. His hands were soft. Too soft for a man his age. "It's nice to meet you too," I said, trying to be polite. "Something smells incredible in here," Chuck said, looking around my small kitchen. "Is that pot roast?" "Yes, it's Keisha's favorite." "Well, I'm sure it's delicious, but we actually can't stay for dinner. I made reservations at that new French place downtown. I want to take Keisha somewhere special." Keisha looked disappointed for just a second, but then Chuck put his arm around her, and she smiled again. "Maybe next time, Mom," she said. But there wasn't a next time. Every time they came over after that, Chuck had somewhere else they needed to be. Some restaurant they had to try. Some event they had to attend. Some place that was better than my little house with my home-cooked meals. Slowly, Chuck started changing things about Keisha. She stopped wearing the clothes I had bought her for Christmas. Chuck thinks I should dress more professionally, she said. She stopped watching our favorite TV shows together. Chuck says those shows are silly, she said. She stopped calling me every few days like she used to. Chuck thinks I depend on you too much, she said. Chuck thinks. Chuck says. Everything became about Chuck. And I started to feel like I was disappearing from my daughter's life, one piece at a time. The worst part was watching Keisha change. My happy, bubbly, independent daughter became quiet and nervous. She stopped laughing as much. She stopped sharing her thoughts and feelings with me. Are you happy? I asked her one day about 6 months ago. We were sitting in my living room. Keisha was checking her phone every few minutes, like she was worried about something. Of course I'm happy, Mom. Why would you ask that? I don't know. You seem different lately. More worried. I'm not worried. I'm just growing up. Chuck is helping me become more mature. Mature. Like being close to your mother was immature. Keisha, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? She looked at me then, and for just a second, I saw my little girl again. The one who used to tell me everything. But then her phone buzzed, and the moment was gone. I have to go, Mom. Chuck is picking me up in 10 minutes. That was the last real conversation we had before today's phone call. After that, our talks became shorter and more distant. Keisha would call once a week, but it felt like she was checking off a box on a list. Call Mom. Done. And now she was married. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door around dinner time, carrying a casserole dish. I made too much tuna casserole, she said, but I knew she was just being kind. Mrs. Patterson had been watching out for me ever since her husband died 3 years ago. Thank you, I said, letting her in. Would you like some coffee? That sounds nice. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Keisha used to do her homework every night after school. Mrs. Patterson took one look at my face and frowned. What's wrong, Dorothy? You look like you've seen a ghost. So I told her everything. About the phone call. About the wedding. About Chuck and how he had slowly taken my daughter away from me. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. I've seen this before, honey. Some men, they don't like sharing. They want their wives all to themselves, even if it means cutting off family. But why would Keisha let him do that? I raised her to be strong, to think for herself. Love makes people do foolish things sometimes. And men like Chuck, they're good at making women feel like they need to choose. Him or everyone else. So she chose him. It looks that way. I started crying then. I couldn't help it. I don't understand how my own daughter could look me in the eye and tell me I'm not important enough to be at her wedding. Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and took my hand. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Oh, she meant it. You should have seen her face. She was almost happy to hurt me. That doesn't sound like the Keisha I remember. It's not. Chuck has changed her into someone I don't recognize. We sat in silence for a while, drinking our coffee and thinking our own thoughts. Finally, Mrs. Patterson spoke. What are you going to do? I don't know. What can I do? She's made her choice. Maybe. But sometimes people need to learn the hard way. And when they do, they need someone to come back to. You think she'll come back? I think Chuck isn't done yet. Men like him, they don't stop at just separating a woman from her family. They keep taking and taking until there's nothing left. Mrs. Patterson's words gave me a chill. What do you mean? I mean, honey, I think this is just the beginning. After she left, I sat alone in my living room as the sun went down. I looked at all the pictures of Keisha and me on the walls. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Graduation days. In every picture, we looked happy together. Like we belonged together. But apparently I was wrong. Apparently, I wasn't important enough to belong in her life anymore. The phone didn't ring that night. Or the next day. Or the day after that. My daughter was married and she was gone. And I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. 7 days passed. 7 long, quiet days where I jumped every time the phone rang, hoping it might be Keisha calling to apologize. But it never was. I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned the house twice. I organized my closets. I even started that puzzle Mrs. Patterson had given me for Christmas, 1,000 pieces of some lighthouse by the ocean. But my mind kept going back to that video call, to Keisha's cold smile, to those words that cut through me like glass. We only invited important people. I must have replayed that moment 100 times in my head, looking for some sign that she didn't mean it. Some hint that Chuck had made her say it. But every time I remembered her face, I saw the same thing. My daughter, looking right at me, telling me I didn't matter. On the 7th night, I was getting ready for bed when the phone rang. It was almost midnight. Nobody calls that late unless something is very wrong. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. Hello. Mom. The voice was small and broken. Barely a whisper. Keisha. Mom, She was crying. Not just crying, sobbing like her heart was breaking. All the hurt and anger I had been carrying for a week melted away in an instant. This was my little girl, and she was in pain. Sweetheart, what's wrong? What happened? I can't talk long. Chuck he went out, but he'll be back soon. Keisha, you're scaring me. Are you hurt? Not physically. But Mom, I think I made a mistake. A big mistake. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. What kind of mistake? The wedding. Everything. Chuck isn't. He isn't who I thought he was. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. What do you mean? After the wedding, something changed. He changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. She was crying harder now. I could barely understand her words. He took my phone away for 3 days. Said I didn't need to talk to anyone but him. He said you would just fill my head with negative thoughts about our marriage. My hands started shaking. He took your phone? He said married women don't need their mothers anymore. That I belong to him now. Belong to him. Like she was a piece of property. And the money, Mom. He made me put his name on my bank account. Said married couples should share everything. But then he moved all my savings to an account I can't access. Oh, Keisha. I tried to talk to him about it, and he got so angry. He didn't hit me, but he grabbed my shoulders and shook me. Hard. He said I was being ungrateful after everything he'd done for me. I felt sick to my stomach. Where are you now? I'm at home. Our apartment. But it doesn't feel like home anymore. It feels like a prison. Keisha, you need to get out of there. You need to leave him. I can't, Mom. I don't have any money. He has my credit cards, my bank cards, everything. And he said if I ever tried to leave him, he would make sure I lost important people. There were those words again. Listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was terrified. You can come here. Right now. Tonight. Just pack a bag and come to my house. I can't. He'll find me there. That's the first place he'll look. Then we'll figure something else out. We'll call the police. And tell them what? That my husband took my credit cards? That he shook me once. They'll say it's a marital dispute. She was probably right, and we both knew it. Mom, I'm so sorry about the wedding. About what I said to you. Chuck made me practice those words. He said I needed to make a clean break from my old life. My old life. Like the 25 years I spent raising her was something to be thrown away. He said you would try to control me, try to break us up. He said the only way our marriage could work was if I chose him over everyone else. And you believed him? There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet I could barely hear her. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that someone loved me enough to want me all to himself. I thought it was romantic. Romantic. There was nothing romantic about isolation and control. But it's not romantic, Mom. It's scary. He watches everything I do. He reads my emails. He times how long I'm gone when I go to the store. And when I try to talk to him about it, he says I'm being paranoid. That this is what marriage is supposed to be like. This is not what marriage is supposed to be like, Keisha. I know that now. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to get out. We'll figure it out together. But first, you need to be safe. Is there somewhere you can go? A friend's house? Somewhere Chuck doesn't know about. Maybe. There's this girl from work, Sarah. Chuck doesn't like her, so I haven't talked to her much lately. But maybe. Call her. Tonight. As Sue, what if Chuck comes home while I'm gone? Tell him you went to the store. Tell him anything. But get out of that apartment. Okay, I'll try. And Keisha. Yeah. I love you. No matter what happened, no matter what you said to me, I love you. You will always be the most important person in my life. She started crying again. I love you too, Mom. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We'll get through this, baby. I promise. After we hung up, I sat in my dark kitchen and cried. But these weren't tears of hurt or anger. These were tears of fear. My daughter was trapped. My strong, smart, independent daughter had been turned into a prisoner in her own marriage. And the man who did it to her was the same man who had convinced her I wasn't important enough to be at their wedding. Chuck had played this perfectly. He had isolated her, taken her money, made her dependent on him. And when she finally realized what was happening, she had nowhere to go and no way to get there. But he had made one mistake. He had let her call me. And now I knew the truth. Now I knew what kind of man my daughter had married. Chuck thought he was so smart. He thought he had won. But he didn't know Dorothy Johnson very well. And he was about to find out that a mother protecting her child is the most dangerous thing in the world. The next morning, I couldn't sit still. I kept walking around my house, picking things up and putting them down, checking my phone every few minutes to see if Keisha had called again. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my daughter's broken voice telling me how Chuck had shaken her, how he had taken her money, how he had turned her into a prisoner. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. My heart jumped, thinking it might be Keisha, but the number wasn't one I recognized. I answered anyway. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson?" The voice was smooth and friendly. Too friendly. "Yes. This is Chuck, your son-in-law. I think we need to talk." My blood went cold. How did he get my number? And why was he calling me? I didn't answer right away. I was trying to think, trying to figure out what this meant. "Mrs. Johnson? Are you there?" "I'm here." "Good. I was hoping we could clear the air between us. I know Keisha was upset last night, and she may have said some things that weren't entirely accurate. Like my daughter was a liar. What do you want, Chuck?" "I want us to be family, Mrs. Johnson. I want us to get along. Keisha loves you very much, and it breaks my heart to see her torn between us." Torn between us. Like I was the problem. "Where is Keisha now?" I asked. "She's at work. She has a big presentation today. Very important for her career." I noticed he didn't answer my question directly. He told me where she was supposed to be, not where she actually was. "I'd like to talk to her." "Of course you would. And I'm sure she'd like to talk to you too. But Mrs. Johnson, I think it would be better if we settled this between ourselves first. Adult to adult. Adult to adult. Like Keisha wasn't an adult who could make her own decisions. What exactly do you think we need to settle?" "Well, I think there's been some misunderstanding about our wedding. Keisha feels terrible that you were hurt by our decision to keep it small." "Our decision. Not his decision. Our decision. Chuck, let me ask you something. If you were getting married, wouldn't you want your mother there?" There was a pause. "My mother was there, Mrs. Johnson." "Exactly. So why wasn't I?" "It's complicated. Keisha has some issues with boundaries, with letting go of the past. I've been helping her work through that. Issues with boundaries. Letting go of the past." He was talking about my daughter like she was sick, like loving her mother was some kind of disease. "And you thought the best way to help her was to exclude her mother from her wedding?" "I thought the best way to help her was to start fresh. To begin our marriage without any outside influences." Outside influences. That's what I was. An outside influence on my own daughter's life. "Chuck, I've been thinking about this conversation all morning, and I have to ask you something." "Of course. Ask me anything." "Why are you really calling me?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm calling because I care about Keisha. And I care about you too, Mrs. Johnson. I want us all to be happy." "That's not why you're calling." "I'm sorry. You're calling because Keisha called me last night. You're calling because she's starting to see who you really are. And you're scared." The friendly tone in his voice started to slip. "Mrs. Johnson, I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "Am I? Then explain it to me. Explain why you took my daughter's credit cards. Explain why you moved her money to an account she can't access. Explain why you shook her hard enough to scare her." "Keisha told you those things?" "Yes, she did." "Then she's lying." The words came out sharp and cold. All pretense of friendliness was gone now. "My daughter is not a liar. Your daughter is confused. She's having a hard time adjusting to married life. Sometimes she imagines things. Imagines things." Now he was trying to make me think she was crazy. "Chuck, I've known my daughter for 25 years. I know when she's telling the truth." "Do you?" "Because the Keisha I married has a tendency to exaggerate, to make herself the victim in situations where she's really the problem." I felt my temper rising, but I tried to keep my voice calm. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" "I'm trying to tell you that your daughter called you last night because she wanted attention. Because she wanted to cause drama. Because she can't stand the fact that I'm the most important person in her life now, not you." There it was. The truth, finally. Chuck wasn't calling to make peace. He was calling to warn me off. "And I'm trying to tell you, Mrs. Johnson, that if you really love your daughter, you'll stay out of our marriage. You'll let us work through our problems without interference from family who don't understand the situation." "Is that a threat, Chuck?" "It's advice. Good advice. from someone who has Keisha's best interests at heart. And if I don't take your advice, then I think you'll find that Keisha will have to make some difficult choices. And I don't think you'll like the choices she makes. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, my hands shaking with anger. Chuck had just threatened me. He had just told me that if I tried to help my daughter, he would make sure I lost her completely. But what scared me more than his threats was how calm he had sounded. How practiced. Like he had done this before. Chuck wasn't just controlling my daughter. He was good at it. This wasn't his first time isolating a woman from her family. And now I understood something that made my blood run cold. The wedding wasn't just about keeping me away. It was about sending a message. To me, to Keisha, to everyone who knew us. Chuck owned her now. And if anyone tried to interfere, there would be consequences. I thought about calling Keisha at work, but Chuck would be expecting that. He was probably monitoring her calls, maybe even listening to them. I thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? That my son-in-law had been rude to me on the phone? That he had threatened to keep my daughter away from me? Like Keisha said, they would call it a marital dispute. No, Chuck was too smart for that. He knew exactly how far he could push without breaking any laws. But he had made one mistake in that phone call. He had let me hear his real voice. Not the charming, polite voice he used in public. His real voice. Cold and mean and dangerous. And now I knew exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I got in my old car and drove across town to Keisha's workplace. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I needed to see my daughter with my own eyes, to make sure she was really okay. The building where Keisha worked was one of those tall glass towers downtown. I had only been there once before, when she first got the job 3 years ago. She had been so proud, showing me around, introducing me to her coworkers. I parked across the street and waited. I felt foolish, like some kind of spy, but I didn't know what else to do. Chuck had made it clear that he was watching Keisha's phone calls. I couldn't risk getting her in more trouble. Around 5:30, people started coming out of the building. I watched every face, looking for my daughter. Then I saw her. She looked terrible. Her face was pale and thin, like she hadn't been eating. She was walking fast, looking over her shoulder, like someone was following her. But what scared me most was how small she looked. My tall, confident daughter looked like she was trying to disappear. She got into a black sedan with tinted windows. Chuck's car, I realized. He was picking her up from work now. Probably had been for weeks. As the car drove past me, I caught a glimpse of Chuck behind the wheel. He was talking to Keisha, his mouth moving fast, his face angry. Keisha was looking down at her hands, not saying anything back. I followed them. I know that sounds crazy, but I had to know where they were going. I had to know if my daughter was safe. They drove to a fancy grocery store on the other side of town. I watched from the parking lot as Chuck got out and said something to Keisha through the window. She nodded quickly, like a child being given instructions. Then Chuck drove away, leaving Keisha alone. This was my chance. I waited until Chuck's car was out of sight, then I got out and walked into the store. I found Keisha in the produce section, staring at a display of apples like she couldn't remember what she was supposed to buy. When I said her name, she spun around, and her face went white when she saw me. She told me I couldn't be there. That if Chuck found out, there would be trouble. When I told her about Chuck's threatening phone call that morning, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, she looked like she was about to cry. She apologized for calling me the night before. Said she was scared and didn't know who else to talk to. But now Chuck was angry and watching her even more closely. He had driven her to work that morning and picked her up that night. He never used to do that. I told her she had to leave him. That she could come home with me right then. She shook her head. Said he would find her there, and she didn't know what he would do. Then she told me what had happened that morning. After she got off the phone with me, Chuck had been waiting for her. He had heard everything. He said if she ever talked to me about their private business again, there would be consequences. When I asked what kind of consequences, her voice got even smaller. She said he had shown her pictures on his computer. Private pictures that he had taken without her knowing. He told her if she ever tried to leave him or embarrass him, he would send those pictures to everyone at her work. To all her friends. To me. My heart sank. Chuck wasn't just controlling my daughter. He was blackmailing her. I told her that was illegal. That it was called revenge porn, and it was against the law. She said she knew that. But by the time the police did anything about it, the damage would already be done. When I asked what she was going to do, stay married to him forever, She said she didn't know. Maybe if she was a good enough wife, if she did everything he wanted, maybe he would get bored and find someone else. The sadness in her voice broke my heart. My strong, smart daughter was talking like a prisoner, hoping her captor might set her free someday. I told her men like Chuck don't get bored. They don't find someone else and let you go. They get worse. She said she knew that, but what choice did she have? I wanted to tell her she had lots of choices. I wanted to tell her we could figure this out together. But the truth was Chuck had been very smart. He had trapped her in a way that made leaving seem impossible. Career would be over. Her life would be over. She looked at her watch and said she had to go. Chuck was picking her up in 10 minutes. If she wasn't outside when he got there, she didn't finish the sentence, but I could imagine. I asked if she would call me that night. She said she couldn't. He had taken her phone away again after that morning. Said she obviously couldn't be trusted with it. When I asked how I would know she was okay, she said she didn't know. She apologized for dragging me into this mess. I told her she hadn't dragged me into anything. She was my daughter. This was where I belonged. She hugged me then, quick and desperate, like it might be the last time. We told each other we loved each other. And then she was gone, walking quickly toward the front of the store to meet her husband. I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched Chuck's black sedan pull up. Through the windshield, I could see him checking his watch, looking annoyed that he had to wait even 30 seconds. Keisha got in the car, and Chuck immediately started talking to her. Even from a distance, I could tell he was angry. Keisha was nodding, apologizing, trying to calm him down. As they drove away, I realized something that made my stomach hurt. Chuck hadn't just stolen my daughter. He had broken her. The confident young woman I had raised was gone, replaced by someone who was scared of her own shadow. But I also realized something else. Chuck might be smart, but he wasn't as smart as he thought. He had made another mistake that day. He had let Keisha out of his sight for 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, I had learned something important. My daughter still loved me. She was still my little girl, trapped inside a nightmare she couldn't escape. But maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to help her escape anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Keisha's face in that grocery store. The way she had looked around like a hunted animal. The way she had flinched when I said Chuck's name. This wasn't the daughter I had raised. This wasn't the strong woman who had graduated college with honors, who had fought for her job, who had never backed down from anything in her life. Chuck had taken all of that away from her. He had turned my brave girl into someone who was afraid of her own shadow. But he had also made a mistake. Several mistakes, actually. He had called me. He had threatened me. And now I knew exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. I had dealt with bullies before. When Keisha was in elementary school, there was a boy who used to push her around on the playground. The teachers wouldn't do anything about it, so I went to his parents. When that didn't work, I went to the principal. When that didn't work, I went to the school board. The bullying stopped. Chuck thought he could intimidate an old woman. He thought he could scare me away from my own daughter. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The next morning, I started making phone calls. First, I called my lawyer. I hadn't talked to him in years, not since I had updated my will, but he still remembered me. I told him about Chuck, about the blackmail, about the threats. He listened carefully and then explained what options we had. The pictures Chuck was using to threaten Keisha. If he had taken them without her knowledge, that was illegal. If he had threatened to share them, that was illegal too. But proving it would be hard, especially if Keisha was too scared to testify against him. The financial control was trickier. Chuck was her husband. He had legal rights to their shared accounts. Unless we could prove he was stealing from her, there wasn't much the law could do. But there were other things we could do. Legal things. Smart things. My lawyer started working on what he called a safety net. Papers that would protect Keisha if she decided to leave. Documents that would make it harder for Chuck to hurt her financially. Next, I called my bank. I had been saving money my whole life. Not much, but enough. I had planned to leave it all to Keisha someday, but someday might be too late. I arranged to have money transferred to a new account. An account that only I could access. Money that would be there if Keisha needed it. Money for a lawyer, for a place to stay, for a new start. Then I called Mrs. Patterson. I told her everything. About the wedding, about Chuck's threats, about what I had learned at the grocery store. Mrs. Patterson had lived a long life. She had seen a lot of things. And she had an idea. She knew people. People who had dealt with situations like this before. Women who had escaped from men like Chuck. Women who could help. She made some calls of her own. By the end of the week, I had what felt like a small army behind me. My lawyer, my banker, Mrs. Patterson's friends from her church, even a social worker who specialized in domestic abuse cases. But the most important call I made was to Keisha's work. I didn't know if Chuck was monitoring her work phone, but I had to take the chance. I called the main number and asked for Sarah, the coworker Keisha had mentioned. Sarah remembered me. She had met me once, at a company picnic 2 years ago, back when Keisha was still allowed to bring her mother to work events. I told Sarah I was worried about Keisha, that she seemed different lately. Scared. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said she had been worried too. Keisha had changed over the past year. She used to be outgoing, friendly, confident. Now she barely spoke to anyone. She ate lunch alone at her desk. She never joined the other women for drinks after work anymore. And there were other things. Sarah had seen bruises on Keisha's arms that she tried to cover with long sleeves. She had seen her jump when her phone rang, like she was afraid of who might be calling. Sarah had wanted to say something, but she hadn't known how. She hadn't wanted to interfere in Keisha's marriage. I told her that sometimes interfering was exactly what friends needed to do. Sarah agreed to keep an eye on Keisha, to let me know if anything seemed wrong, and most importantly, to be there if Keisha needed help. 2 weeks passed. 2 long, quiet weeks where I didn't hear from Keisha at all. But I heard from Chuck. He called me again late at night. This time he didn't bother being friendly. He told me he knew I had been asking questions, making calls, causing trouble. He said if I didn't stop, there would be consequences. Not just for me, but for Keisha. He reminded me about the pictures, about Keisha's job, about how easy it would be to destroy her life if I kept interfering. But this time, his threats didn't scare me. This time, I was ready for him. I told him I knew exactly what kind of man he was. I told him I knew about men who hurt women, who control them, who think they own them. I told him that Keisha might be afraid of him, but I wasn't. And then I told him something that made him go very quiet on the other end of the line. I told him I had been recording our phone calls. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had heard in weeks. Finally, Chuck spoke. His voice was different now. Careful. Worried. He said recording I told him he was wrong. I had checked with my lawyer. In our state, only one person in a phone conversation needs to know it's being recorded. And since I knew, the recordings were perfectly legal. I also told him that threatening someone over the phone was definitely illegal. And I now had 2 recordings of him doing exactly that. Chuck hung up without another word. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, Chuck was the one who was scared. The next day, Sarah called me from work. Something had happened to Keisha that morning. She had come in with a black eye that she was trying to hide with makeup. When Sarah asked about it, Keisha said she had walked into a door. But Sarah had seen enough domestic violence in her own family to know what a fist looked like compared to a door. Keisha was also more nervous than usual. She kept checking her phone, jumping every time it made a sound. She had spilled coffee on herself twice before lunch, which wasn't like her at all. Sarah asked if she should call the police. I told her not yet. Chuck was too smart to leave obvious evidence. One black eye could be explained away, especially if Keisha backed up his story. We needed to be smarter than that. But I also told Sarah to document everything. Take pictures if she could. Write down dates and times. Build a record. Because I had a feeling this was just the beginning. That afternoon, I got a call that surprised me. It was Keisha's friend Monica. I hadn't heard from Monica in over a year, not since Chuck had started isolating Keisha from her friends. Monica said she had run into Keisha at the mall the weekend before. Keisha had been shopping alone, which was unusual since Chuck usually went everywhere with her. Monica had tried to talk to her, but Keisha seemed jumpy and distracted. She kept looking over her shoulder, like she was watching for someone. But the strangest thing was what happened when Monica suggested they grab coffee and catch up. Keisha had started to say yes, but then her phone rang. After she answered it, her whole face changed. She said she had to go immediately. Monica followed her out to the parking lot, worried about her friend. She watched Keisha get into Chuck's car. Even from a distance, Monica could see Chuck was angry. He was yelling at Keisha before she even got the door closed. Monica wanted to do something, but she didn't know what. She had heard that Keisha was married now, but she hadn't been invited to the wedding. None of Keisha's old friends had been. I thanked Monica for calling and asked her to reach out to other friends from Keisha's past. I wanted to know if anyone else had seen signs that something was wrong. Over the next few days, more pieces of the puzzle came together. Keisha's college roommate called. She said Keisha had stopped returning her emails about 6 months ago. Before that, they had written to each other every few weeks for years. Her friend from her old job called. She said Keisha had missed their annual birthday lunch for the first time in 5 years. When she called to ask why, Chuck had answered Keisha's phone and said Keisha was too busy to maintain old friendships. Even Keisha's hairdresser called. She said Keisha had been coming to her for 3 years, but suddenly stopped about 8 months ago. The last time she saw her, Keisha had seemed different. Quiet. Sad. Each phone call painted the same picture. Chuck had been systematically cutting Keisha off from everyone who cared about her. One friend at a time. One relationship at a time. Until the only person left in her life was him. But Chuck had made another mistake. He thought that by isolating Keisha, he was making her weaker. Instead, he had made her more visible. People noticed when someone disappeared from their life. They remembered. They worried. And now they were all calling me. A week later, I was getting ready for bed when I heard a car in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Chuck's black sedan parked behind my old car. Chuck was getting out of the driver's seat. He was alone. He walked up to my front door like he owned the place. Like he had every right to be there. When he knocked, it wasn't a polite knock. It was hard and demanding. I looked through the peephole and saw his face. He wasn't pretending to be charming anymore. He looked angry. Dangerous. Part of me wanted to call the police. Part of me wanted to hide until he went away. But then I thought about my daughter. About her black eye. About how small and scared she had looked in that grocery store. I opened the door. Chuck pushed past me into my living room without being invited. He looked around like he was casing the place, taking note of everything. Finally, he turned to look at me. His eyes were cold and mean. He told me we needed to have a conversation. A real conversation this time, without any games or tricks. He said I had been causing problems for him and Keisha. Making phone calls. Asking questions. Recording conversations. He said it needed to stop. I told him I wasn't going to stop. I told him I would never stop fighting for my daughter. That's when Chuck smiled. But it wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that makes your blood run cold. He said I was making a big mistake. He said I didn't understand how much power he had. How much he could hurt Keisha if I kept interfering. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me something that made my knees go weak. It was a video. A video of Keisha, taken without her knowledge. She was getting undressed in what looked like their bedroom. Chuck said he had dozens of videos like this. Pictures too. All taken without Keisha knowing. He said if I didn't back off, every person Keisha had ever known would see them. Her co-workers. Her friends. Me. He said Keisha's career would be over. Her reputation would be destroyed. She would have nothing left except him. And then he said something that made my heart stop. He said maybe it was time people knew what kind of woman my daughter really was anyway. Something inside me snapped when he said those words. This man was standing in my living room, threatening to destroy my daughter's life, and now he was calling her names. Like she was the problem. Like she was the one who had done something wrong. I looked at Chuck standing there in his expensive suit, with his perfect hair and his cruel smile, and I saw him for what he really was. A coward. A man who could only feel powerful by hurting women. Who could only feel important by making other people small. I told him to get out of my house. He laughed. Actually laughed. Like the idea of me telling him what to do was the funniest thing he had ever heard. He said I wasn't in charge here. He said he was in charge. Of Keisha, of me, of everything. He said I was just a lonely old woman who couldn't accept that her daughter didn't need her anymore. That's when I did something that surprised both of us. I started recording him on my phone. Chuck saw what I was doing and his face went red with anger. He told me to put the phone away. I kept recording. He said if I didn't stop, he would take the phone away from me. He said it wouldn't be hard. I was just an old woman after all. I told him he was welcome to try. But I also told him something else. I told him about the panic button Mrs. Patterson had given me. The one that would bring the police to my house in less than 5 minutes. I told him about the security camera my neighbor had installed that pointed at my driveway. The one that had recorded him coming to my house uninvited. I told him about all the people who knew he was there. Sarah from Keisha's work, who I had texted when I saw his car. My lawyer, who I had called before answering the door. Mrs. Patterson, who was probably watching through her window right now. Chuck's smile disappeared. I told him he wasn't as smart as he thought. That bullies never were. I told him I had spent the last 3 weeks building a case against him, gathering evidence, recording his threats, documenting his abuse. I told him that Keisha might be afraid of him, but I had lived too long and seen too much to be scared of a man like him. Chuck started backing toward the door. But before he left, he had one more thing to say. He told me I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. He said I would regret interfering in his marriage. He said when he was done with Keisha, there wouldn't be anything left of her for me to save. Then he walked out, slamming the door behind him. I stood in my living room, shaking from head to toe. Not from fear, but from rage. Chuck thought he had won. He thought his threats would send me running back to my corner like a scared old woman. Instead, he had just declared war on the wrong mother. I called my lawyer immediately. I sent him the recording of Chuck's threats. I told him about the videos, about the blackmail, about everything. My lawyer said we finally had what we needed. Chuck had just confessed to multiple crimes while being recorded. The videos he had shown me were illegal. The threats he had made were illegal. Coming to my house uninvited and trying to intimidate me was illegal. But more importantly, we now had proof that Keisha was in immediate danger. My lawyer said he would file for an emergency restraining order first thing in the morning. He would also contact the police about the criminal charges. But he warned me that Chuck might do something desperate before we could get the legal protection in place. I called Sarah at home and told her to watch Keisha extra carefully the next day. I called Mrs. Patterson and asked her to keep an eye on my house. I even called Monica and asked her to drive by Keisha's apartment building, just to make sure everything looked normal. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. I prayed for my daughter's safety. I prayed for the strength to keep fighting. I prayed for Chuck to leave her alone long enough for us to get her out. But mostly, I prayed that I hadn't just made things worse for Keisha by standing up to her abuser. The next morning, everything went wrong. Sarah called me at 7 in the morning. Keisha hadn't come to work. She hadn't called in sick. She just didn't show up, which wasn't like her at all. Sarah had tried calling Keisha's work phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried calling the apartment, but no one answered. By noon, I was frantic. I called the police and asked them to do a welfare check. The police called me back an hour later. They had gone to the apartment, but no one was home. The landlord let them look inside. There were no signs of violence, but some of Keisha's clothes were missing. Chuck's car was gone too. I realized with a sinking heart what had happened. Chuck had taken my daughter and disappeared. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. The police put out a missing person report, but they said since Keisha was an adult and married to Chuck, there wasn't much they could do unless we had proof she was taken against her will. My lawyer filed the restraining order anyway, but you can't serve papers to someone you can't find. I barely slept. I barely ate. I sat by my phone waiting for it to ring, praying it would be Keisha calling to tell me she was safe. Instead, it was Chuck who called. His voice was different this time. Calm. Almost cheerful. Like he was calling to chat about the weather. He told me he and Keisha had gone away for a little vacation. A second honeymoon, he called it. Somewhere they could work on their marriage without outside interference. I asked to speak to Keisha. He said she was sleeping. Said she had been very tired lately. Very emotional. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I told him I knew he had taken her against her will. That what he was doing was kidnapping. Chuck laughed. He said Keisha had come with him willingly. Said she had realized that I was trying to destroy their marriage, and she wanted to get away from my toxic influence. He said they might stay away for a while. Maybe permanently. Maybe they would start fresh somewhere new, where nosy old women couldn't interfere in their happiness. I told him the police were looking for them. He said let them look. He hadn't broken any laws. A man taking his wife on a trip wasn't a crime. But then his voice got harder. He said he wanted me to call off the police. Cancel the restraining order. Stop making trouble. He said if I did that, maybe he would let Keisha call me sometime. Maybe. But if I kept causing problems, I might never hear from my daughter again. Then he hung up. I immediately called the police and gave them the phone number Chuck had called from. They said they would try to trace it, but these days people could make calls from anywhere. They also said Chuck was right about one thing. If Keisha had gone with him willingly, even if she had been coerced, it would be very hard to prove kidnapping. I felt helpless. For the first time in this whole nightmare, I felt like Chuck might actually win. But then Sarah called with news that changed everything. She said she had been going through Keisha's desk at work, looking for any clues about where Chuck might have taken her. She found something hidden in the back of Keisha's drawer. It was a small notebook, the kind you might use to write down phone numbers or grocery lists. But Keisha hadn't been writing down phone numbers. She had been keeping a record. Every page was filled with dates and times. Every time Chuck had yelled at her. Every time he had threatened her. Every time he had hurt her. She had written down what he said, what he did, even what he was wearing. She had documented everything, going back almost a year. There were entries about him taking her credit cards, about him monitoring her phone calls, about him following her to work. There were entries about the pictures he had taken without her permission, about the threats he had made, about the times he had grabbed her, shaken her, pushed her. One entry made me start crying. It was from the day after their wedding. She had written, "Chuck said I embarrassed him at the reception by talking to his aunt too long. He squeezed my arm so hard it left bruises. I wore long sleeves to work today. I think I made a mistake getting married." Another entry was from 3 weeks ago, right after Chuck's first threatening phone call to me. She had written, "Chuck heard me talking to Mom. He was so angry. He said if I ever talked to her about our marriage again, he would make sure I never talked to anyone again. I think he meant it." The last entry was from 2 days ago, the night Chuck had come to my house. She had written, "Chuck came home in a rage tonight. He said Mom was trying to destroy our marriage. He said we had to leave town, go somewhere she couldn't find us. I tried to say no, but he said I didn't have a choice. He said if I didn't come with him willingly, he would make those pictures public and ruin my life. I'm scared. I don't know how to get help. If something happens to me, I want everyone to know it wasn't my fault." Sarah said there was more. Pages and pages of Chuck's abuse, all written in Keisha's careful handwriting. But most importantly, there was something else hidden in the back of the notebook. A bank account number. And a phone number. Sarah said she had called the phone number. It belonged to a women's shelter 3 towns over. Keisha had been planning to leave Chuck. She had opened a secret bank account. Ash had been working on an escape plan. But Chuck had taken her away before she could use it. I asked Sarah to take the notebook to the police immediately. This was the evidence we needed. This proved that Keisha hadn't gone with Chuck willingly. This proved she was in danger. But even more importantly, it proved something else. My daughter hadn't given up. Even when she seemed broken, even when she seemed helpless, she had been fighting back in the only way she could. She had been documenting everything, preparing for the day when she could escape. Chuck thought he had broken her spirit completely. He thought he had turned her into someone who would never fight back. He was wrong. ND been saving money little by little, hiding it from him. Keisha was still in there, still fighting, still planning. And now I knew she was waiting for someone to help her get free. The police took Keisha's notebook very seriously. With her own written testimony of Chuck's abuse and threats, they finally had grounds to issue an arrest warrant. They also put out what they called a bolo alert, be on the lookout for Chuck's car. Every police officer in 3 states would be watching for them. But I couldn't just sit and wait for the police to find them. I had to do something. I started calling every hotel and motel within a 500-mile radius. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. Most places wouldn't give me any information. Privacy policies, they said. I understood that, but it didn't make it less frustrating. Then I remembered something Chuck had said during one of our phone calls. He had mentioned taking Keisha somewhere they could work on their marriage without interference. Chuck was the kind of man who liked nice things. Expensive things. He wouldn't take Keisha to some roadside motel. He would want to stay somewhere that made him feel important. I started calling upscale resorts instead. Places that advertised themselves as romantic getaways for couples. On my 15th call, I hit something. The woman at the Mountain View Resort remembered checking in a couple 3 days ago. The man had paid cash for a week-long stay, which was unusual. Most people used credit cards. She also remembered the woman seemed upset. Quiet, like she didn't want to be there. When I described Chuck and Keisha, the woman said it sounded like the same couple. I called the police immediately and gave them the information. They said they would send officers to check it out. But then I did something that probably wasn't smart. I got in my car and started driving toward the Mountain View Resort myself. I knew the police had told me to stay home and let them handle it. I knew Chuck was dangerous. I knew I was putting myself at risk. But this was my daughter. And I had already lost too much time. The drive took 3 hours. 3 hours of worrying, of praying, of imagining all the terrible things Chuck might be doing to Keisha while I was driving through the mountains. I reached the resort just as the sun was setting. It was one of those fancy places with cabins scattered through the woods, each one private and isolated. Perfect for someone who wanted to hide. I parked in the main lot and walked to the front desk. The same woman I had talked to on the phone was working. She told me the police had already been there. They had gone to cabin 12, where the couple was staying. But when they knocked, no one answered. The cabin was empty. The couple was gone. My heart sank. We had been so close. But then the woman told me something else. She said housekeeping had cleaned the cabin after the police left. They found some things the couple had left behind. Women's clothes, a phone charger, and something else. A piece of paper with writing on it. The woman showed me the paper. It was torn from a small notebook. The same kind of notebook Keisha had been keeping her record in. Written in Keisha's handwriting was a single sentence. "He's taking me to the lake house." My hands started shaking as I read those words. Chuck had a lake house. He had mentioned it once months ago when he was trying to impress me. He said his family had owned it for years. Said it was his private retreat. But I had no idea where this lake house was. I called the police and told them about the note. They said they would try to find property records for Chuck, see if they could locate any lake properties registered in his name. But that could take hours. Maybe days. I didn't think Keisha had days. Then I remembered something else. Chuck's aunt, the one Keisha had talked to too long at their wedding reception. The one who had gotten Chuck so angry. I had met her once, briefly, at a company party before Chuck and Keisha got married. Her name was Linda, and she had seemed nice. Normal. Nothing like Chuck. I wondered if she knew about the lake house. It took me another hour of phone calls to track down Linda's number. When I finally reached her, she sounded surprised to hear from me. I told her about everything. About Chuck's abuse, about Keisha's disappearance, about the note we had found. Linda was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was sad. She said she had suspected something was wrong with Chuck for a long time. He had always been different from the rest of the family. Angry, controlling, mean to the women he dated. She said the lake house was about 2 hours north of the resort. It was in a remote area, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. No neighbors for miles. She gave me directions. Detailed directions, because she said there were no street signs once you got off the main highway. She also told me something else. Something that made my blood run cold. She said Chuck's grandfather had built that lake house back in the 1940s. Back then, it had been used for things the family didn't like to talk about. Chuck's grandfather had been a violent man. He used to take his wife there when he wanted to hurt her without the neighbors hearing her scream. Chuck knew that history. Linda said he had always been fascinated by those old family stories. I thanked Linda and immediately called the police with the location. They said they would send officers there as soon as possible. But as I sat in my car in that resort parking lot, looking at the directions Linda had given me, I realized something. The police were at least 4 hours away from that lake house. Maybe more, depending on how long it took them to organize and get moving. I was only 2 hours away. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Chuck had taken Keisha there for a reason. That he wasn't planning to bring her back. I started my car and began driving toward the lake house, knowing I was probably making the biggest mistake of my life. But also knowing I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to save my daughter. The drive to the lake house was the most terrifying 2 hours of my life. The highway turned into back roads, then the back roads turned into dirt paths that barely fit my car. My headlights cut through the darkness as I followed Linda's directions, turning left at the old red barn, right at the fallen tree, straight past the abandoned gas station. Every mile took me further from civilization, further from help. I kept thinking about what Linda had told me about the lake house's history, about Chuck's grandfather and the terrible things that had happened there, about how Chuck had always been fascinated by those family stories. What if I was too late? What if Chuck had brought Keisha there to finish what his grandfather had started all those years ago? I tried calling the police again to tell them I was heading to the lake house myself, but my phone had no signal. I was completely on my own. Finally, after what felt like hours of driving through the dark woods, I saw it. The lake house sat at the end of a narrow dirt driveway, surrounded by tall pine trees. It was bigger than I had expected, but it looked old and run down. Like a place where bad things happened and nobody cared enough to fix them. I turned off my headlights and pulled behind a cluster of trees where my car couldn't be seen from the house. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. Through the trees, I could see lights on in the house. There was movement in one of the windows. I sat in my car for a moment, trying to figure out what to do next. I was a 75-year-old woman about to face a violent man who was probably twice my size and half my age. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was probably going to get me killed. But then I thought about Keisha's notebook. About all those careful entries documenting Chuck's abuse. About how my daughter had been planning and hoping and fighting, even when it seemed like she had given up. She hadn't given up on herself. I couldn't give up on her either. I got out of my car as quietly as I could and started walking toward the house. The front porch creaked under my feet, and I froze, waiting to see if anyone had heard me. When nothing happened, I crept closer to the lit window. What I saw through that window made my heart stop. Keisha was sitting in a chair in what looked like the living room. Her hands were tied behind her back. Her face was bruised, and her clothes were torn. But she was alive. She was conscious. She was looking around the room like she was searching for a way to escape. Chuck was pacing back and forth in front of her, talking. I couldn't hear what he was saying through the glass, but I could see his face. He looked angry. Out of control. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was a gun on the table next to Keisha's chair. I realized with horrible clarity what Chuck was planning. He had brought Keisha to this isolated place to kill her. Just like his grandfather had done to his grandmother all those years ago. I had to do something. But what could I do? If I tried to break in, Chuck would hear me coming. If I tried to call for help, there was no cell service. Then I remembered something Mrs. Patterson had told me weeks ago, back when this nightmare was just beginning. She had said that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully was to make them think they weren't in control anymore. I walked around to the back of the house, looking for another way in. The back door was unlocked. Chuck probably figured nobody could find this place anyway. I slipped inside as quietly as I could. The house smelled old and musty, like it had been closed up for years. I could hear Chuck's voice now, coming from the living room. He was yelling at Keisha, calling her names, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong. I crept closer, staying in the shadows, until I could see them both clearly. Chuck had his back to me. He was standing over Keisha, waving his hands as he talked. The gun was still on the table, just a few feet away from him. I knew I had only one chance. If I could get to that gun before Chuck realized I was there, maybe I could turn this whole situation around. I took a deep breath and stepped into the living room. Both Chuck and Keisha saw me at the same time. Keisha's eyes went wide with fear and hope. Chuck spun around, his face twisted with rage and surprise. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Chuck started laughing. Not a happy laugh. A cruel, dangerous laugh. He told me I was even stupider than he thought. Coming to a place like this, all alone, like some kind of hero in a movie. He said I had just made things easier for him. Now he could take care of both problems at once. He reached for the gun. But I had spent the last month learning how to deal with Chuck. I had learned that bullies like him expected people to be scared, to back down, to give up. So instead of running, instead of begging, instead of showing him the fear that was eating me up inside, I did something Chuck never expected. I smiled at him. And then I told him about the police cars that were already on their way up that dirt road. Chuck's hand stopped halfway to the gun. His eyes narrowed as he looked at me, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. I kept smiling. I kept my voice calm and steady, even though my heart was beating so fast I thought it might explode. I told him I had called the police before I got out of my car. I told him they had been tracking his phone calls, following his credit card records, watching him for days. I told him this whole lake house thing was a trap, and he had walked right into it. Chuck's face went pale. He looked toward the windows like he expected to see police cars pulling up any second. That's when I made my move. While Chuck was distracted, looking out the windows, I lunged for the gun on the table. My 75-year-old body moved faster than it had in years. Faster than I thought it could. But Chuck was younger and stronger. He saw what I was doing and grabbed for the gun at the same time. We both reached it together. For a moment, we were both holding the gun, both trying to pull it away from the other. Chuck was stronger, but I was desperate. And desperate mothers are stronger than anyone expects. I managed to twist the gun away from Keisha's direction, toward the floor. If it went off, at least it wouldn't hit my daughter. Chuck was cursing at me, calling me names, trying to wrestle the gun out of my hands. That's when Keisha did something that reminded me why I had raised such a strong daughter. Even with her hands tied behind her back, even after everything Chuck had put her through, she wasn't going to just sit there and watch. She threw herself sideways in the chair, knocking into Chuck's legs and sending him stumbling backward. The gun went flying across the room. Chuck hit the wall hard and slid to the floor, dazed. I ran to Keisha and started untying the ropes around her wrists. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the knots, but finally they came loose. Keisha threw her arms around me and held on tight. She was crying and saying she was sorry, over and over again. I told her there was nothing to be sorry for. I told her we were going to be okay. But Chuck wasn't done yet. He got back to his feet and started looking for the gun. It had slid under an old couch on the other side of the room. I knew we had maybe 30 seconds before he found it. I grabbed Keisha's hand and pulled her toward the back door where I had come in. We ran through the kitchen, through the back hallway, out into the cold night air. Behind us, I could hear Chuck yelling. He had found the gun. We ran toward my car, stumbling through the dark woods, branches scratching at our faces and arms. I could hear Chuck coming after us. He was crashing through the trees, shouting threats, promising to kill us both. We reached my car, and I fumbled for the keys with shaking hands. The car seemed to take forever to start. Finally, the engine turned over. I threw the car in reverse and backed out of our hiding spot just as Chuck emerged from the trees. In my rearview mirror, I saw him raise the gun. I floored the gas pedal, and we shot forward down that narrow dirt road, tires spinning, rocks flying. A gunshot echoed through the night behind us, but we were already too far away. We drove in silence for the first few miles, both of us too scared to speak. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I expected to see Chuck's headlights following us. But the road behind us stayed dark. Finally, when we reached the main highway and I could see other cars, other signs of civilization, Keisha spoke for the first time. She told me she had never stopped hoping I would come for her. She said even when Chuck was at his worst, even when she thought she might not survive, she knew her mother would never give up on her. She said that's what kept her strong enough to keep fighting. I had to pull over then because I was crying too hard to see the road. We sat in that car on the side of the highway, holding each other, both of us alive and free and together. 20 minutes later, we saw the police cars heading in the opposite direction, toward the lake house. By morning, Chuck was in custody. By the end of the week, he was charged with kidnapping, assault, domestic violence, and a dozen other crimes. The pictures and videos he had used to threaten Keisha became evidence against him. His own threats, recorded on my phone, sealed his fate. But more than that, Keisha's notebook became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Every careful entry she had made, every date and time and detail, painted a clear picture of a man who had systematically destroyed a woman's life. Chuck's lawyer tried to claim that Keisha had gone with him willingly, that their relationship problems were just normal marital issues. But the jury saw through that lie. They heard the recordings of Chuck threatening me. They saw the evidence of his financial abuse. They read Keisha's own words describing months of terror and control. They found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. But the real healing began after the trial was over. Keisha moved back in with me for a few months while she put her life back together. Those were some of the best months I had had in years, even though they came from such a terrible situation. We talked about everything. About how Chuck had slowly isolated her from everyone who loved her. About how he had made her feel like she was going crazy, like her own thoughts and feelings couldn't be trusted. Keisha told me about the wedding day, about how Chuck had made her practice those cruel words she said to me. He had told her that if she didn't cut me out of her life completely, their marriage would never work. She said she knew the words would hurt me, but she was so afraid of what Chuck would do if she didn't say them exactly the way he wanted. She apologized over and over for that phone call, for telling me I wasn't important enough to be at her wedding. I told her she didn't need to apologize. I told her Chuck had been playing a game where the rules kept changing, where she could never win no matter what she did. I told her the important thing was that we had found our way back to each other. Slowly, Keisha started rebuilding the relationships Chuck had forced her to abandon. Monica came over for dinner. Sarah visited on weekends. Her old college roommate flew in from across the country just to see her. All the people who had been worried about her, who had noticed when she disappeared from their lives, welcomed her back with open arms. Keisha also started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping survivors of domestic abuse. She learned words for what Chuck had done to her. Gaslighting, financial abuse, emotional manipulation, isolation. She learned that what happened to her wasn't her fault. That loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. She learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. After a few months, Keisha felt ready to get her own apartment again. Part of me was sad to see her go, but I was also proud. She was taking control of her life again, making her own choices. Her new apartment was small but bright, with big windows and yellow walls that made everything feel cheerful. Nothing like the dark, controlled space she had shared with Chuck. She kept Chuck's last name for a while, not because she wanted to remember him, but because changing it back would have meant more paperwork, more legal hassles. She had been through enough legal battles to last a lifetime. But eventually, she changed it back to Johnson. Back to the name that connected her to me, to her father's memory, to the family that had never stopped loving her. 6 months after the trial, Keisha surprised me with something I never expected. She wanted to have a ceremony. Not a wedding. She said she might never feel ready to get married again. But a celebration. A way to mark her freedom, her survival, her return to the life Chuck had tried to take away from her. She planned it herself, the way she should have been able to plan her wedding. A small gathering in my backyard, with all the people who really mattered to her. Mrs. Patterson came, and Sarah, and Monica, and her college roommate, and her therapist, and even Linda, Chuck's aunt who had helped us find the lake house. There were flowers and music and food that Keisha actually liked, not the fancy stuff Chuck had always insisted on. Everyone gave little speeches about how glad they were to have Keisha back in their lives, about how proud they were of her strength and courage. But the speech that meant the most to me was the one Keisha gave herself. She stood up in front of all of us, looking beautiful and confident and free, and she talked about what she had learned. She said she had learned that love doesn't mean giving up who you are for someone else. That real love makes you stronger, not weaker. She said she had learned that asking for help isn't a sign of failure. That the people who truly care about you will fight for you even when you can't fight for yourself. She said she had learned that she was worth fighting for. Then she looked right at me and said something that made me cry happy tears for the first time in months. She said, "Mom, 2 years ago I told you that only important people were invited to my wedding. I was wrong about who the important people were. But I'm not wrong anymore. This party is for all the important people in my life. And Mom, you're the most important of all." Everyone clapped and cheered, and I hugged my daughter tight, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. Later, after everyone went home and we were cleaning up the dishes, Keisha asked me something. She asked me if I ever regretted fighting so hard for her. If I ever wished I had just walked away when Chuck told me to stay out of their marriage. I looked at my daughter, my strong, beautiful, free daughter, and I knew exactly what to say. I told her I would do it all again in a heartbeat. I told her that when she said those words to me on that video call, about only inviting important people to her wedding, it felt like she had buried me alive. It felt like 25 years of love and sacrifice meant nothing. But I also told her that pain led me to fight harder than I had ever fought for anything in my life. It led me to see Chuck for what he really was. It led me to build an army of people who cared about her. It led me to that lake house in the middle of the night, where I learned that a mother's love can be stronger than any weapon. I told her that the day she called me crying was the day I knew our story wasn't over. That no matter how far apart Chuck tried to push us, the bond between a mother and daughter could never really be broken. I told her that Chuck was wrong about a lot of things, but he was especially wrong about what makes someone important. Important isn't about money or status or power. Important isn't about being able to control other people or hurt them when they don't do what you want. Important is about showing up. Important is about staying when things get hard. Important is about loving someone even when they push you away, even when they hurt you, even when they tell you you're not wanted. Important is about fighting for the people you love, even when the odds are stacked against you. I told Keisha that she would always be the most important person in my life, and I would always be there to fight for her, no matter what. Then I told her something else. I told her that Chuck had taught me something valuable, even though he never meant to. He taught me that love that excludes isn't really love at all. Real love includes. Real love makes room. Real love lifts people up instead of cutting them down. And he taught me that sometimes it takes betrayal and pain and heartbreak to show you who you really are and what you're really capable of. At 75 years old, I discovered I was stronger and braver and more determined than I had ever imagined. I discovered I could face down a man with a gun if it meant saving my daughter. I discovered that being a mother isn't just about raising a child. It's about never stopping being their safe harbor, no matter how old they get, no matter how lost they become, no matter how far they drift away. Keisha hugged me then, and we stood in my kitchen, The same kitchen where this whole story began with that terrible phone call. Holding each other and knowing we were both exactly where we belonged. That was 3 years ago. Today, Keisha is thriving. She got a promotion at work. She bought her own house. She's even started dating again, a kind, gentle man who treats her like she deserves to be treated and who thinks it's wonderful that she's close to her mother. Chuck is still in prison and will be for many years to come. And me? I'm still here in my little house, with my pictures of Keisha on the refrigerator and my morning coffee at the same kitchen table. But I'm different now. Stronger. More sure of myself. Because I learned something that I hope I never forget. When someone tells you that you're not important enough to be part of their life, they're really telling you something about themselves. They're telling you that they don't understand what love really means. And when your child is in danger, when they need you to fight for them, even if they can't ask for help, you don't hesitate. You don't doubt yourself. You don't worry about what other people will think. You do whatever it takes to bring them home. Because that's what mothers do. That's what love does. And no one, not Chuck, not anyone, gets to decide whether you're important enough to love your own child. I asked my daughter about her wedding, and she said only important people were invited. A week later, she called me crying. And that's when I learned that sometimes the most important battle you'll ever fight is the one for someone who thinks they don't want you to fight at all. But you fight anyway. Because love always fights. And love always wins. Underscore 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 underscore. Thank you for staying with me through Dorothy's incredible journey of courage, heartbreak, and triumph. This story reminds us that a mother's love knows no bounds, and that sometimes the people who tell us we're not important are the ones who need to hear about real strength the most. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to thumbs up like this story. If it moved you, bell subscribe for more powerful true stories like Dorothy's. Loudspeaker share this with someone who needs to hear that they matter. Speech balloon comment below. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love? What would you have done in Dorothy's situation? Your engagement helps stories like this reach other people who might need to hear them. Every like, share, and comment helps build a community where real stories of strength and survival can inspire others. And remember, you are important. Your love matters. And sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to give up on someone, even when they think they don't want you to fight. See you in the next story. Until then, keep fighting for the people you love.